up, guys? Trevor Hunter here at Dirt Bike Test. Today we're kind of going over our initial build on this 2024 KX450X. So we did a few races on this bike stock, did some testing and whatnot, and we decided it was good enough to go racing at kind of a high level. And so we did some minimal updates, mainly just like the generic updates that most people will do to their own bikes. And we took it racing at the National Grand Prix Championship round in 29 Palms, California. So today I'm just going to kind of go over that setup and how it worked and kind of where we're headed with this bike. So first off, the list of changes is fairly short but sweet. TCS Power Sports, they revalved our suspension. We put the right spring rates in for us and then just revalved it a little stiffer for a pro level off-road racer. So we did that. We did, for the motor, we have an FMF 4.1 slip-on, and that replaces the stock unit. We still have a stock header for now. We have a DT1 air filter cage and air filter setup. Comes with it's a screenless air filter cage and it's domed, so you get a little more of a filter profile on that. For a gas tank, we have an IMS 2.8 gallon tank that translated from the 2023 version or model. That kind of just bolts right on. It's super simple, and it's nice that transferred from one model to the next generation. And for steering stabilizer, we're running a precision racing steering stabilizer. So that kind of just bolts straight to the frame and to the handlebars. You don't have to change triple clamps or do anything special. So it's hoping we went that route just to keep the bike as stock as possible. Instead of running the GPR, we have to run the top triple clamp. But yeah, we have precision steering dampener. As far as the other mods, really the only other mods are we're running Dunlop AT82 tires, front and rear, and the Air Mousse foam inserts in the tires. Other than that, the mods are pretty minimal, but kind of right now we're going to go over how that worked. So first off, the big thing that a lot of people are talking about is this KX motor and whether it's too slow, if it's just right. That's definitely up to the rider. The 29 Palms track is probably one of the, if not the fastest Grand Prix out here on the West Coast. It's we probably average in the 50 mile an hour range today, high 40s, low 50 mile an hour range. So it's a pretty high speed race, and having a faster motor or faster bike there doesn't always hurt. I found one thing with this KX is not that it was necessarily slow, but just how hard you had to ride it to go fast. Definitely performs better up on the top end. And when I ride a 450, I like to lug bikes and ride a lot taller gears. So kind of not being able to ride those taller gears like I'm used to with my Yamahas, for example. Took a little bit just to get used to that, but once you kind of learn that, okay, you got to rev it and kind of ride the bike harder, I'd say it was still plenty fast enough, and our results were pretty good over the weekend. So I'd say the motor wasn't holding us back. It's definitely not the character I think I want out of this bike, and we're going to work to make it better. But having this FMF slip-on was a night and day difference over the stock. Really opened it up, and just a lot better throttle response. It pulled harder, and it really pulled harder on top as well. I feel like with the stock motor, it fell flat on top, but with this FMF slip-on, it helped there. And then in line with that, the DT1 filter and the air filter cage and the filter setup did a lot of the same things as the FMF, maybe not as drastic, but kind of moved the power in line with that. It had a little better throttle response, pulled harder through the rev range, and overall just pulled harder and further on top. So putting that DT1 filter setup, and we also drilled out the air filter cover. We put 6 holes in there to help the bike move a little better. All that helped with the bike's pulling power and just a lot better on top end. Like I said, stock, it kind of fell flat on top, and the old KX is really good about making a lot of its power up in the higher RPMs. And so this bike, it definitely it makes more power on top end, but still has that bottom to mid that was already pretty decent on this bike to begin with. Moving on to suspension, we definitely made some big improvements over stock. Mainly just, I'm going off-road pro level speed, and we're racing on the roughest tracks. So you really need a fairly stiff setup for that kind of racing and riding. And so TCS did a really good job. We're kind of experimenting in directions on how we want to set the suspension up, whether we keep it more of like a Showa style or we go more KYB or even WP style with the settings inside. But overall it worked well. I think the general front end of this bike feels pretty good. The rear end is where we're struggling with a little bit, and whether that's chassis or suspension. I think it's a little bit of a mixture of both. We've made some improvements with the shock, but I think we could go fine-tune it a little bit more with internal valving and whatnot. But I also think there's maybe a little bit more here chassis-wise that could help this bike. It's got a little bit of deflection here and there. It doesn't really drive through the bumps quite as good as I'd like it to. So we're going to keep working on that a little bit with suspension and some chassis parts and see if we can kind of fine-tune that rear end just a little bit more. But another thing too for the chassis setup stuff, it's important to know we're running our forks at flush, so that's just a little bit more stability, especially in the off-road stuff. I think for moto, I'd raise the forks back up a little bit, but for the off-road stuff, especially this 29 Palms track, dropping the forks at flush really just helped the stability. And like I said, this track is really fast and really choppy, and so getting a good stability is a little bit more important than tight cornering. But overall, just dropping the forks seemed to help the chassis balance and whatnot. And then for sag, we shortened the shock, I think 2 millimeters internally. Normally we would go 3, but we just didn't have the base plate to make it a 3 millimeter change. So we shortened the shock, I think 2 millimeters, and then we ran the sag right on 107, 108. And what we did on last year's bike was we shortened it. We put the 3 millimeter, shortened it 3 millimeters, and then ran the sag around 104, 105. So I think if we were able to get that, shorten the shock just a little bit more to run a little bit less preload, that would help a little bit in what I'm feeling. And then it's also we put a one link longer chain on this bike as well. So stock, the bike comes with the rear axle pretty far up in the swing arm, but we wanted to lengthen that out and get a little bit more stability and just lengthen out the overall chassis for better balance. And so adding a link to the rear chain helps put that axle a lot further back, and another important setup tip. So run the axle far back, forks at flush were definitely the right direction for this bike as an off-road bike. And yeah, but overall it's a pretty solid package. And yeah, like I said, I think that Kawasaki didn't necessarily ruin this bike. Definitely there's some steps to be made from stock to make it kind of what you want, but overall it worked pretty good, and we got pretty good results. We got third in the 450 AA class on one day, and then we won the 25 plus class the following day. So I think this bike is definitely plenty capable, and overall for how little testing time we have on it, I think going into the race weekend we had about 10 hours on the stock bike, and yeah, so we had very minimal time to set up suspension or kind of mess with anything, and I think overall performed really well, and we have a really good base to go from here. And I think this bike, like I said, I don't think Kawasaki ruined it with this bike and all the generational updates that they made. So it's definitely a positive, especially with the direction that a lot of the bikes are going. There's still more to be found here, but I think overall this bike's really good. And yeah, so stay tuned to dirtbiketest.com for more on this bike, as well as all of our other testing. Until then, we'll see you out on the trail.
If you liked what you saw in this video, come check us out over at dirtbiketest.com on the webs. We have bike tests, product tests, a lot of fresh dirt, and you can even support us by clicking through our links. Hopefully, we'll see you out in the trail.